There comes a moment in every man's life when silence speaks louder than his strength, when she's next to you, but her heart isn't. When she smiles out of habit, not happiness, you can feel the distance, but you tell yourself she's just being emotional. Yet, deep down you know, it's not her emotions that changed, it's the connection that faded, because somewhere along the way you stopped showing up in the ways that truly mattered. You mastered physical positions, but forgot the emotional ones, and that's where most men lose the woman who once prayed for their presence. You see, intimacy isn't built in the bedroom. Myths revealed there. A woman doesn't crave a man who just touches her body. She craves a man who understands the positions of her heart, the ones that don't require strength, but softness. Not dominance, but devotion. These are the 5 relationship positions women appreciate, but men, too often, avoid. Most men are taught that vulnerability is weakness, that showing emotions makes them less of a man. But to a woman, vulnerability is the language of safety. It's the moment she feels she can put her guard down because you just put yours down first. When you tell her, "I'm scared too," or "I'm trying to figure it out," you're not losing power, you're deepening trust. She doesn't want perfection, she wants presence, and the man who isn't afraid to say, "I need you," becomes the man she never stops choosing. Men often hear to reply, but rarely listen to understand. Listening is not waiting for your turn to speak. It's creating space for her truth to exist without interruption. When she's venting, she's not always asking for solutions. Sometimes she's asking, "Can you handle me at my rawest?" To sit, to nod, to hold her gaze and say nothing, that's power. Because silence in the right moment is louder than 1,000 opinions. The woman who feels heard will never crave attention elsewhere. This is the position that separates boys from men. It's easy to defend yourself, harder to reflect. But a woman respects a man who can say, "You're right, I could have done better." Accountability doesn't make you small, it makes you trustworthy. When you admit your mistakes, you tell her, "Our relationship matters more than my ego," and that single act can rebuild what pride destroyed. A man who can own his faults invites forgiveness. A man who hides them invites resentment. Women appreciate a man who can lead emotionally, not with control, but with clarity. Emotional leadership means you don't let chaos define the connection. You bring calm when she brings confusion. You guide conversations that could become conflicts. You say, "Let's not talk to win, let's talk to understand," because real masculinity isn't about domination, it's about direction. When a man can hold emotional space, he becomes her anchor in a world full of uncertainty. Every woman wants to be desired, but even more, she wants to be chosen. Over and over again, not just in the beginning when it's exciting, but in the middle when it's demanding. Devotion is not a grand gesture, it's consistent effort. It's texting her in the middle of a busy day just to say, "I'm thinking of you." It's noticing when her silence shifts, when her laughter fades. It's protecting her peace as fiercely as you protect your pride. Because when a man loves with devotion, a woman blooms in security. Gentlemen, these are not positions of the body, they are positions of the soul. And yes, they require courage, they require patience, but most importantly, they require heart. Because in a world where men chase validation through performance, the real kings find power in emotional posture. When you stand in these 5 positions, vulnerability, listening, accountability, emotional leadership, and devotion, you don't just make her stay. You make her feel safe enough to never want to leave, and that, my friends, is the rarest form of intimacy. Not what happens when the lights go off, but what remains when the silence begins. The position of vulnerability is where most men hesitate to stand, yet it is the very place where a woman's heart begins to trust. It is not a posture of weakness but of truth, and truth is what builds emotional intimacy. A woman does not fall in love with the version of you that looks unbreakable. She falls for the version that lets her see the cracks and still chooses to keep standing. When you show her that your armor is heavy, that your fears are real, she doesn't see you as fragile. She sees you as human. And that's what she wants, not a statue carved in stoicism, but a soul she can reach. Most men have been trained since boyhood to hide emotion. They've been told to be strong, to fix, to protect, to never let their guard down, but in the process, they learn to suppress what makes them most alive. They become experts at building walls, not bridges. They confuse silence with control and distance with discipline. Yet what a woman craves is the opposite. She wants to see your unguarded heart, to hear your unscripted voice, to feel your unfiltered truth. She wants to know that behind the calm exterior lives a man who feels deeply, who wrestles with life, and who isn't afraid to say, "I'm struggling." Vulnerability is not about oversharing. It's about honest sharing. It's saying, "I'm scared of losing you," instead of pretending you're indifferent. It's saying, "I don't know how to fix this," instead of shutting down when conflict arises. It's admitting, "I need reassurance sometimes," instead of masking insecurity with pride. Every time you open up, you invite her to do the same. Your vulnerability becomes her permission to be real. It creates a loop of emotional safety where love doesn't need to perform. It just needs to exist. The irony is that many men fear vulnerability because they think it will make them lose respect. But the truth is, respect grows in its presence. A woman can only admire what she can understand. When she sees the courage it takes for you to be transparent, she doesn't pity you. She trusts you. She feels chosen not because of what you say, but because of what you risk to say it. You let her into the parts of yourself that no one else gets to touch, and in that moment, she knows she matters. There's a certain power in saying, "I don't have it all together," because it invites partnership, not pity. It says, "I value your presence enough to be seen without perfection," and that is intimacy in its purest form. The man who hides his wounds robs his woman of the chance to help him heal. The man who reveals them gives her something sacred to hold, his trust. And when a woman holds a man's trust, she becomes softer, more loyal, more nurturing. Vulnerability doesn't weaken the masculine. It awakens the feminine in her. In every strong relationship, there comes a moment when the walls must come down, when you stop performing strength and start revealing sincerity. When you stop trying to impress her and start trying to connect with her, that's when love grows roots. A woman will never forget the night you let her see your pain, the moment you confessed a fear, the time you said, "I don't know what to do, but I want to do it with you." Those are the memories that shape the foundation of intimacy. To be vulnerable is to be brave enough to be seen fully. It's the quiet declaration that says, "I trust you with the real me." And that level of honesty doesn't scare a real woman. It moves her. It makes her see you not as a man trying to prove something, but as a man who already knows who he is. In a world obsessed with dominance and control, vulnerability remains the rarest and most powerful position a man can take. Because it doesn't just win a woman's body, it wins her faith, her respect, and her forever. The position of listening is one of the most misunderstood yet most desired forms of love. Many men hear their partners, but few truly listen. There's a difference between sound and presence. Hearing is about processing words. Listening is about understanding the heart behind them. A woman doesn't speak to be analyzed, she speaks to be felt. She wants to know that her voice echoes somewhere inside you, that her emotions aren't just tolerated, but treasured. The moment a man learns to listen without defense, he becomes a safe space in her world of noise. Listening isn't a passive act. It's a form of intimacy that says, "You matter enough for me to stop and give you my full attention." It's not waiting for your turn to speak, not trying to fix her problem before she finishes the sentence. It's allowing silence to breathe between her words, giving her permission to be raw without fear of judgment. When a woman speaks her heart and you meet her with patience instead of interruption, with empathy instead of explanation, she begins to relax into your energy. She begins to trust that her truth can exist around you. Most men struggle with this position because they think their role is to solve. They want to offer logic where she's offering emotion, but she's not asking for a solution, she's asking for connection. When she tells you about her day, her worries, her disappointments, she doesn't always need advice. Sometimes she just needs you to hold the space and say, "I understand," or "That must have been hard." Those simple words tell her she's not alone in her experience. They tell her that her feelings are valid. And in validation, love grows deeper roots than logic ever could. A woman who feels heard stops shouting. A woman who feels understood stops defending. Listening is the doorway to peace in a relationship. It dissolves tension before it becomes distance. When she speaks with fire and you respond with calm, she learns that your presence is stronger than her storms. And that's what she needs, not a man who silences her, but one who steadies her. The man who can listen without reacting earns a level of respect that no grand gesture can replace. True listening goes beyond words. It means observing what isn't said. It's noticing when her tone changes, when her energy feels off, when her laughter sounds forced. It's being tuned into her silences as much as her sentences. Sometimes she'll say, "I'm fine," and you'll know she's not. Sometimes she'll laugh to hide fatigue, and you'll feel the exhaustion behind it. To listen is to read between the lines of love, to understand that emotion speaks in many dialects, and words are only one of them. Listening is also humility. It's choosing understanding over being right. It's setting aside your pride long enough to hear her truth, even when it challenges yours. Because love isn't a debate, it's a dialogue, and the strength of a relationship isn't built on who wins the argument, but on who listens through it. The man who listens through discomfort learns what most men never will, that silence can heal faster than explanations. There's an unspoken power in looking into her eyes while she speaks, not with distraction, but with presence. When you put your phone down, lean in, and let her know, "I'm here," it changes the energy in the room. She feels seen, valued, respected, and in that moment her heart begins to open. The walls that words built start to fall because she realizes she doesn't have to fight to be understood. When you master the position of listening, you stop hearing complaints and start hearing cries for connection. You stop treating her emotions as exaggerations and start recognizing them as invitations. To care deeper, to understand better, to love wiser. Because a woman who feels heard will give you her softness without fear, she will meet your honesty with affection. And she will stand by you not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. Listening, when done with love, becomes the purest form of leadership, a quiet command that doesn't need to control, only to care. And that is what every woman truly wants. Not a man who always has something to say, but a man who always knows how to listen. The position of accountability is where true masculinity is tested not in strength, but in humility. It's easy to play the role of the protector, the provider, the man in control. But accountability demands a different kind of courage. It asks you to look in the mirror and confront the parts of yourself that hurt others, the words you wish you could take back, the actions you justified in the heat of ego. A woman doesn't need a perfect man, she needs an honest one, A man who can say, "You're right, I messed up," instead of building walls of excuses. Accountability is not about guilt, it's about growth. It's a declaration that you value the relationship more than your pride. When a man refuses accountability, he teaches his woman that her pain doesn't matter. Every time he deflects responsibility, every time he shifts blame, a small piece of trust breaks away. She starts to feel unheard, unseen, unimportant. But when you own your mistakes, you send her a powerful message: "I respect you enough to face the consequences of my actions." That moment changes everything. It turns anger into empathy, resentment into respect. Because accountability is not weakness, it's integrity in motion. A man who practices accountability doesn't see it as an attack on his character. He sees it as an opportunity to become better. When she tells you, "That hurt me," you don't rush to defend yourself. You take a breath and say, "I didn't realize that. Tell me more." Those 4 words can disarm the deepest wounds. They show that you're not trying to win, you're trying to understand. And understanding is the seed of healing. Many men fear accountability because they equate it with losing power, but the opposite is true. Power grows where responsibility is embraced. A woman feels safest with a man who can admit when he's wrong because it tells her that his strength isn't built on arrogance. It's built on self-awareness. The man who takes ownership of his actions becomes a steady presence in her life. Someone she can rely on, not because he's flawless, but because he's real. In relationships, there will always be mistakes, words said in anger, promises delayed, attention withheld. What defines the relationship is not the absence of those mistakes, but the presence of accountability afterward. When you circle back and say, "I shouldn't have spoken to you like that," or "I know I've been distant, and I'm sorry," you show emotional maturity. You remind her that the bond between you matters enough to repair. Every apology becomes a brick that rebuilds what ego once cracked. Accountability also means holding yourself responsible even when no one is watching. It's about checking your tone when she's quiet, noticing when your actions don't match your intentions, and correcting yourself before she has to point it out. It's about asking, "How can I show up better for you?" without needing her to beg for effort. The man who self-corrects is the man who earns lasting respect. Because love without accountability is chaos. It becomes a cycle of hurt, followed by hollow apologies. But love grounded in accountability becomes a partnership of peace. It takes discipline to admit when you're wrong. It takes maturity to listen when your instinct is to defend. But that's what separates emotional boys from grounded men. The boy blames the world for his pain. The man studies it. The boy says, "That's just how I am." The man says, "That's something I need to work on." Accountability transforms love from something fragile into something resilient. It allows 2 people to grow together instead of apart. A woman never forgets the man who apologizes with action, the one who doesn't just say sorry, but changes the behavior that caused the hurt. Because consistency after apology is what restores faith. When she sees that you've learned, that you've evolved, she feels safer giving you her heart again. Accountability tells her that her love isn't being taken for granted. It tells her that her presence is valued enough to inspire your growth. Every strong relationship stands on 2 pillars, trust and accountability. You can't have one without the other. When you embrace accountability, you stop running from your reflection. You stop fearing your flaws. You become the kind of man who leads not with dominance, but with dignity. And that, in the end, is what makes a woman stay, not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to be better. The position of emotional leadership is one that many men underestimate. Yet it is one of the greatest forms of strength a man can offer in a relationship. It is not about control or dominance. It is about direction. It's about being the calm in her chaos, the steadiness in her storms, and the compass that helps guide both hearts toward understanding instead of conflict. Emotional leadership doesn't mean